People often assume there's one big moment that makes somebody leave their faith. A debate you watched, a book you read, a tragedy that shakes you to your core. And sure, for some people, it happens just like that. A single event flips the switch. But for me, it was different. My deconversion didn't come through a debate stage or a philosophy book. It came through something far more personal. It came in hospital rooms with my heart racing as doctors fought to bring my children into the world. It came in late night conversations at the edge of a child's bed when curiosity left me with no choice but to answer honestly. It came in the quiet but heavy responsibility of realizing I could either hand my kids the same prepackaged beliefs I grew up with, or I could give them the freedom to think for themselves. The secret catalyst to my deconversion wasn't doubt alone. It wasn't even disappointment in religion. It was fatherhood. Becoming a parent forced me to confront every crack in my theology. Every birth, every question, every promise to be honest with my children pulled me further away from faith and deeper into truth. All four of my children came into this world through C-sections. That wasn't what I imagined when I thought about fatherhood. In my mind, childbirth was supposed to be this natural, beautiful process, maybe even a sacred one. But from the very beginning, it was anything but predictable or smooth. Each birth was surrounded by danger. Each time I was reminded that life is fragile, that survival is never guaranteed. I can still remember sitting in that hospital room, heart pounding, praying prayers I wasn't even sure would reach anywhere, watching as doctors and nurses worked with precision. The beeping machines, the surgical masks, the tense looks on the staff's faces. They were the ones holding life and death in their hands. Not God, not faith, not my prayers. They were. And as each of my children finally cried out for the first time, I felt overwhelming gratitude, but not toward heaven, toward the humans in that room who used their training, their knowledge, and their courage to keep my wife and my children alive. Those moments carved something deep into me because I had been taught to see birth as evidence of God's design, a perfect plan unfolding. But what I saw didn't look perfect at all. If this was God's design, why did it require so much intervention? Why would the most natural, essential part of life, bringing children into the world, be so dangerous without surgery, medicine, and human ingenuity? If this was design, it looked flawed, it looked careless, and it put a crack right down the middle of my theology. The truth is, those experiences forced me to admit something I had avoided for years. The stories I'd been told about God's providence did not match reality. In church, I heard that God is in control. In the hospital, I saw human beings fighting tooth and nail to keep control from slipping away. In sermons, I heard God provides. In delivery rooms, I saw how much we depended on science, on research, and on human creativity. And here's what hit me hardest. If not for those doctors, if not for those tools and procedures, my children wouldn't be here. My wife might not be here. That wasn't just a theological problem, that was personal. How could I call something divinely designed when I knew firsthand that human hands were the only reason my family survived? Looking back, I realized those hospital rooms became sacred spaces for me, not because of God's presence, but because they showed me the truth. They exposed the gap between what I was told to believe and what I actually saw with my own eyes. And once you see that gap, you can't unsee it. One of the biggest shifts that came with fatherhood was realizing that I couldn't coast. I couldn't just fall back on the idea that God had written my children's future in some cosmic script and my job was simply to pray, obey, and hope for the best. That idea that our purpose is already pre written was one of the biggest lies that I started to resent. Because when it came to raising my kids, I knew deep down I couldn't afford to be passive. Their lives couldn't be left up to divine mystery. They needed a father who was awake, intentional, and deliberate. Religion had trained me to think in terms of destiny. God has a plan for your life. But the more I looked at my children, the more hollow that sounded. If their lives were already mapped out, what did my responsibility as a parent even matter? Was I just supposed to stand back and let God's will unfold? That didn't sit right with me. Fatherhood exposed how lazy that thinking was and why so many families are in such a bad place now. The truth was, raising children demanded purpose, not the kind that's handed down from a pulpit, but the kind that's built brick by brick in the choices you make every single day and how you engage those consequences. Purpose meant deciding how I would discipline, how I would nurture, how I would shape an environment where curiosity wasn't punished but encouraged. Purpose meant staying up late for conversations, showing up for games and recitals, modeling integrity in the way that I treated their mother, the way that I handled stress, and even the way that I talked about people who disagreed with me. And the more I leaned into that, the more I started to see purpose differently. It wasn't this one size fits all calling stamped on us from heaven. It was something I had to create, something I had to live into with intention. Being a parent on purpose taught me that meaning isn't found, it's made. I didn't want my kids growing up thinking their worth depended on fitting into somebody else's plan, whether it was God's plan or mine. I wanted them to know that they had the freedom to construct their own purpose, and I wanted to model what that looked like. In many ways, fatherhood reprogrammed me. It broke down my dependence on the idea of divine design and replaced it with a hunger for intentional living. It forced me to ask, if I reject non intentional purpose for my children, why would I keep accepting it for myself? When my oldest son started talking and asking questions, it was like watching a mirror of my younger self. He had this brilliant, restless mind, curious about everything, constantly pulling on threads, trying to make sense of the world around him. And in him, I saw both the kid I used to be and the adult I needed to become. When I was his age, I craved that kind of intellectual support. I wanted someone who wouldn't just hand me prepackaged answers or shut me down with just have faith. But instead, I learned early on that curiosity was dangerous, that too many questions could get you labeled rebellious, doubtful, or sinful. I experienced that firsthand. Countless people would warn my mother that I was too inquisitive and the devil would use it against me. I carried that wound for years. So when my son started asking the same types of questions I had once asked, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to do to him what had been done to me. Let me tell you, kids don't let you get away with easy answers. When he asked me something, I could feel the weight of it because if I fed him the same old religious cliches, he would see right through it. He deserved honesty. He deserved respect. He deserved a father who wasn't afraid to admit when something didn't make sense. Those conversations became a kind of accountability for me. I realized I couldn't keep living with one foot in faith and one foot in doubt because every time he asked me a question, I had to decide, would I give him what I was given or would I break the cycle? Would I indoctrinate him into a system I no longer believed or would I give him the space to think for himself? What started as casual conversations about life, about God, about why things are the way they are, turned into a mirror. Through his questions, he was really asking me, Dad, are you going to be honest with me? Are you going to be real with me? And every time I chose honesty with him, I inched further away from the faith I grew up in. In a strange way, he became my teacher. His curiosity pushed me to confront my own. His clarity forced me to clear out my contradictions. And the more I leaned into those conversations, the more I realized that deconversion wasn't just about me. It was about the responsibility I carried for him. If I wanted him to grow up free, honest, and unafraid, then I had to go first. One of the heaviest realizations I had as a parent was this: if I kept repeating the same religious ideas I had been handed, I would be responsible for passing down something I no longer fully trusted. That hit me hard. Indoctrination wasn't just some abstract concept out there in the world, it was sitting at my dinner table, looking me in the face with wide eyes, hanging on my words. And I had a choice: either recycle a system of half truths because it was comfortable, or be honest enough to admit what I didn't know. That tension sharpened something in me. I couldn't live with the idea of my kids growing up believing things simply because I told them to. I didn't want to be complicit in loading them down with fears of hell, false hopes of miracles, or the weight of trying to fit into someone else's divine plan. And just to be clear, the false hopes of miracles is the most damaging aspect of Christian religion. If I demanded honesty from myself, I had to extend that same honesty to them. And that changed the way I saw my role as a father. I stopped seeing myself as a gatekeeper of absolute truths, and started seeing myself as a point of reference, a guide. As a matter of fact, they were a better view into the world for me than I could ever be for them. My job wasn't to hand them a locked box and say, "This is the truth, don't open it, don't question it." My job was to hand them keys to curiosity, to critical thinking, and to compassion, and then let them discover for themselves what kind of world they wanted to live in. That commitment to transparency meant being willing to say, "I don't know." It meant replacing pat answers with open conversations. It meant teaching them that questions aren't a sign of weakness, they're a sign of strength. It meant making peace with the idea that they may not land where I land and being okay with that, because at least they would get there honestly. Looking back, that decision to be honest with my kids was really a decision to be honest with myself, because once I admitted to them that I didn't believe certain things, I couldn't keep pretending I did. Their presence forced me into integrity. And in that way, they didn't just inherit my DNA, they inherited the courage that finally pushed me out of faith. The more I talked with my kids, especially my oldest, the more I realized something. My responsibility as a father wasn't just about the present moment, it was about the future. It was about what I would leave behind when I was gone. And I don't just mean money in the bank or a property in my name. That's important for sure. I mean the kind of inheritance that shapes how your children live, think, and move through the world. Growing up, I was told the greatest thing you could leave your children was faith. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and in the end, he will not depart from it. That verse was drilled into me. But the older I got, the more I saw the damage that that kind of inheritance could do. Passing down unquestioned belief wasn't a gift, it was a burden. It chained you to fear, to guilt, to mental gymnastics that left no room for honesty. I didn't want to hand that to my kids. What I wanted to leave them was freedom, the freedom to think critically, the freedom to make choices without fear of eternal punishment hanging over them, the freedom to wrestle with life's questions without being told curiosity is rebellion. I wanted them to inherit honesty, integrity, and courage, not superstition dressed up as certainty. That desire shaped the way I started looking at the future. I couldn't stomach the thought of my children growing up believing things I no longer believed myself. I couldn't imagine them living small because someone told them God had already written the script. I wanted them to see that life's meaning isn't handed down from heaven. It's built step by step with the choices you make, the love you give, and the integrity you carry. And maybe that's what fatherhood did to me more than anything else. It forced me to think generationally. I stopped asking, "What do I believe?" and started asking, "What am I handing down to my children? What kind of world am I leaving them?" That shift, seeing the future through their eyes, made it impossible to keep clinging to the old faith. Because if I wanted them to inherit a world of truth, freedom, and possibility, then I had to model it myself. So when people ask me about the secret catalyst for my deconversion, I always come back here. It wasn't some book or debate or late night crisis. It was the weight of being a father. The love I had for my children demanded more from me than faith could ever offer. It pushed me toward honesty. It pushed me toward freedom, and it pushed me out of religion for them, but also for me. When people ask me what made me leave the faith, they usually expect me to name a book I read, a debate I watched, or some single moment where it all fell apart. But that's not my story. My deconversion wasn't sparked by one dramatic revelation. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was slower, quieter, and in some ways, much heavier. The secret catalyst for me was fatherhood. Becoming a parent magnified every crack in the foundation of my theology. Each time I sat in a hospital room, watching my children delivered by C section, I was reminded of just how fragile life is. Those moments didn't feel like divine providence. They felt like survival, depending on human knowledge in human hands. They exposed how flimsy God's plan sounded when what really stood between life and death was a scalpel and a surgeon. Every conversation I had with my son pulled me further from the easy answers I had grown up on. His questions tested the integrity of my beliefs, and in his eyes, I could see what I always wanted as a child: someone to take me seriously, to be honest with me, to let me wrestle with the hard questions instead of silencing me with faith. If I wanted that for him, I had to live it for myself. Every reflection on purpose forced me to face a choice. I could raise my kids the way I was raised, telling them their futures were already written and that their lives were about fulfilling someone else's plan. Or I could parent with intention, showing them that meaning isn't handed down from the sky. It's built through the choices we make, the love we give, and the honesty we practice. And every time I leaned into honesty, choosing not to indoctrinate, choosing not to repeat what I no longer believed, I felt myself pulled further from the comfort of religion. It was as if fatherhood demanded a higher standard of truth than faith could really provide. In the end, my children didn't just make me a parent, they made me a seeker of truth. They made me a challenger of old assumptions. They made me someone who could no longer stay in the faith, not because I wanted to tear it all down, but because love required me to build something better. Listen, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you believe what we're doing here matters, then don't just watch, act. Support the channel and community through Patreon, YouTube, or directly with Cash App, PayPal, or Venmo. You can visit Window Shop for guides and merch which are designed to equip you on your journey. But most importantly, tap in. Tell us you're ready to help build local communities because that's how this thing grows. If you're anywhere near Southern California, registration for our October Liftoff weekend opens today. Be there for the start of something absolutely historic. And wherever you are, meet me back here every Sunday at noon. Friends, this is not entertainment. We are building the most important movement in modern human history. Let's build it together. Again, thank you for watching, and until next time, keep rising.